Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on a chapter all about plants.
Yeah.
Challenging how we think about them, really. This chapter explores some pretty amazing scientific discoveries about how plants actually behave.
Yeah, it's incredible. We tend to think of plants as just kind of passive, right? Just sort of being there.
Right.
But this chapter, it really reveals this whole hidden world of complexity. It even goes as far as to ask this question: could plants actually have some kind of intelligence?
Okay, so, we're not talking about plants like writing poetry.
Right, exactly.
Or solving equations or anything like that. So what kind of intelligence are we even talking about here?
Well, it really asks us to kind of rethink how we even define intelligence in the first place,
Yeah.
As humans, we tend to define it based on, well, our abilities,
Right, yes.
our experiences. But plants, they evolve totally different ways to survive and interact, It's like comparing apples and oranges, really.
So instead of looking for, brains and neurons and things like that, what should we be looking for?
We need to look at how plants solve problems.
Oh, interesting.
How they adapt to their surroundings.
Okay.
Even how they communicate with each other. For example, this chapter, it highlights the Azolla fern. Ever heard of that one?
Zola fern. Maybe. It rings a bell, but I can definitely use a refresher.
Yeah, so it's a tiny little fern, one of the smallest in the world, but it actually had this huge impact on the planet millions of years ago.
How?
Well, basically, they blanketed the Arctic Ocean. Totally covered it. And they were absorbing massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere back then.
Oh, so these little ferns were helping to, cool the planet down.
Exactly, yeah. And scientists are actually looking at it now to see if it could help us with climate change today. Isn't that interesting?
That's amazing. Thinking about solutions for our problems today by looking at the past.
Yeah.
And, the power of plants. It's amazing. But how do they do that? How does the Azolla fern absorb so much CO2? Is there something, I don't know, special about it or something?
Well, it's got this secret weapon. See, it's got this symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria. They actually live right in its leaves.
Oh.
Yeah. And those cyanobacteria, they take atmospheric nitrogen and they convert it into a form that the Azolla can use.
Wow, okay.
And in return, the fern gives them a safe place to live and all the nutrients they need.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So this lets the Azolla grow super fast and absorb a ton of CO2 really quickly.
So it's this perfect, partnership.
Exactly.
I've also heard that the Azolla fern is used as a natural fertilizer for farmers, right?
Yeah, you're right. Farmers have actually been using it for centuries, especially in rice paddies.
Oh, cool.
The nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria, well, they actually enrich the water with nitrogen, which is what the rice needs to grow.
So it's a totally natural way to help crops grow better.
It is. It's a perfect example of, sustainable agriculture,
Yeah.
Working with nature.
Yeah. This Azolla fern is just full of surprises. It really shows how something so small can have a big impact.
It really does. And that's just one example. This chapter's packed with all these, mind-blowing discoveries about how plants behave. You want to hear about how ferns reproduce.
Yeah, definitely. I know they don't have flowers or seeds, so I'm, really curious how they make new ferns.
Well, get ready to be amazed. Ferns have this unique way of doing it. They use swimming sperm.
Wait a minute. Swimming sperm. You're telling me there's, little tiny sperm from the fern?
Yeah.
And they swim?
Exactly. They have these tiny little tails that, whip around, and it propels them through the water so they can reach the female parts of the fern.
That's incredible. So they need water to reproduce.
Yeah.
That's probably why they always grow in, damp places, right?
Yeah, exactly. And get this, there's, another layer to this. Some ferns can actually sabotage the sperm of other fern species using hormones.
No way, fern warfare.
It is. They release these hormones into the water that mess up the other sperm swimming, so their own sperm has a better chance.
So it's like a competition.
It is. It's this whole complex world of interaction, even rivalry, between plants.
This is all so fascinating. I'm totally changing how I think about plants.
Yeah.
I used to think they were just kind of, there. But clearly, there's so much more going on that we don't even see.
Right. That's what's so cool about this research. We're really just beginning to understand all the amazing things plants do, and every discovery just makes things even more complex and, well, wonderful. Speaking of changing how we see things, this chapter also talks about the history of research into plant intelligence, specifically this book that came out a while back in 1973. It was called The Secret Life of Plants.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that book. It was like a big deal, right?
It was. It made a lot of people think about plants being conscious. It talked about all these crazy
Oh,
experiments
yeah.
that suggested plants could, like, respond to human emotions, even ESP. Yeah, it definitely caught people's attention. But the scientific community, well, they weren't so happy about it.
So what happened? Like, why did scientists kind of push back against it so much?
A lot of the experiments in the book, they weren't very scientifically sound.
Oh, right.
Other researchers tried to do the same experiments, but they couldn't get the same results. Plus, the book kind of mixed up real science with, well, speculation.
Oh, I see.
So people started calling it pseudoscience.
So did this book, like, hurt research into plant behavior?
It did, yeah. All the controversy around the book, it kind of cast a shadow over the whole field. A lot of scientists just stayed away from the topic.
They didn't want to be associated with it.
Right. It took a long time for the field to bounce back from that.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
So how did research on plant behavior eventually, like, recover from all that?
Well, a new generation of scientists came along. They had better technology.
Okay.
And they were more careful about how they studied plants.
Right.
They focused on, like, really well-designed experiments, controlled conditions, and making sure they could get the same results every time.
So it was all about building a solid foundation for the field.
Exactly. And it worked. Like, in recent years, there's been this huge surge in research on plant behavior,
Great.
leading to tons of new discoveries. We're in a much better place now to explore how plants behave.
So would you say that scientists are, like, more open now to the idea of plant intelligence?
Well, it's still a hot topic.
Okay.
But definitely things have changed. I mean, even if some scientists don't like using the word intelligence when talking about plants,
Right.
they're starting to recognize that plants can do things that are, well, pretty complex.
So what are, like, the main arguments for and against plant intelligence? What's at the core of this whole debate?
Well, the people against it, they often focus on the fact that plants don't have brains or neurons, like we do. They say that you need those things to be intelligent.
So it's like, if it doesn't look like a human brain, it can't be intelligent.
Yeah, kind of. But the people who support the idea of plant intelligence, they say that view is too narrow.
Makes sense.
They say we need to broaden our definition of intelligence and recognize all the different ways living things interact with their world and solve problems.
So instead of looking at the physical structure, like whether it has a brain, we should look at what it does.
Exactly. They point to evidence that plants can remember things,
Oh, interesting.
communicate with each other,
Wow.
and even make decisions based on what's going on around them. They argue that these things show intelligence, even if the way plants do it is different from animals.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand both sides a little better now. So it sounds like this debate is not so much about whether plants are capable of doing complex things, but more about what we even mean by the word intelligence.
That's a great way to put it. It's a question of philosophy as much as science, really. But no matter where you stand on that, you can't deny that plants are capable of some amazing things. This chapter goes on to talk about all these recent discoveries that show just how complex plants are. Are you ready to hear about some of these mind-blowing findings?
Absolutely. I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with plant memory. Might sound strange,
It does, kinda.
but research is showing that plants can actually remember stuff that's happened to them and change how they behave because of it.
Hold on, plants have memory, but how? I mean, they don't have brains, right?
That's the big question. Scientists are still trying to figure out how plant memory works, but we're seeing more and more evidence that plants can store information about things like drought or being attacked by insects.
Oh.
Yeah, and they use that information to protect themselves better in the future.
So like a plant that's been through a drought before, it might be better prepared to handle another one later on.
Exactly. It's like they're learning from their experiences.
That's incredible.
And plant memory, it's not the only surprising thing we're finding out about plants. They also do something called kin recognition, like how animals recognize their relatives.
Wait, plants can recognize their relatives? That's nuts.
Yeah, it's true. Studies have shown that some plants can tell the difference between their siblings and plants that aren't related to them, and they actually act differently depending on who's nearby.
Whoa. How do they do that? Do they have a plant version of a family photo album or something?
Not quite. It's more likely that they recognize each other through chemicals that their roots release.
Oh,
These chemical signals, they're like a language that lets them tell who's family and who's not, and that can change how they grow and how they share resources.
so do plants actually favor their siblings then?
In some cases, yeah. Researchers have seen that when some plants are growing near their siblings, they don't compete as much.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like they'll keep their roots smaller so they don't crowd each other out and they share resources more fairly.
So they're like being nice to their family.
It seems that way. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is. It's like they understand that family is important and that it's good to cooperate.
Exactly. And these discoveries, they challenge how we used to think about plants. Like, we thought they were just individuals all competing for survival.
Right.
But now we're seeing that there's this whole social aspect to plant life.
Yeah, like a sense of community.
Right. And get this. Some plants can actually sense and respond to sound.
What plants can hear. You're kidding, right?
Well, not hear exactly the way we do, but they can definitely detect certain sounds and react to them.
Wow.
There was this study where researchers played recordings of running water to pea shoots.
Okay.
What do you think happened?
I don't know. Did they start dancing or something?
Not quite dancing, but they did something amazing. They actually grew towards the sound.
Seriously?
Yep, like they were trying to find the water.
That's incredible. So they're not just sitting there soaking up sun and water.
Right.
They're actually sensing their environment, reacting all kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Including sound. It's totally changing how we view plants, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? You mentioned some other amazing things plants do.
Oh, yeah. Plants have developed all sorts of incredible ways to protect themselves from things that want to eat them. Some of them are so clever they sound like they're straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Do they have, like, plant lasers or something?
Not lasers, but just as cool. For example, when some plants get attacked by insects,
Yeah.
they release these special chemicals into the air that attract other insects, like parasitic wasps.
Whoa.
And those wasps, they come and attack the insects that are bothering the plant.
Like a defense system.
Exactly. It's like they're calling for backup.
That's so cool. It's like they have their own little bodyguard service.
It is, and some plants get even more sneaky. They release chemicals that mess up the development of insect larvae.
Really?
Yeah, so the larvae get deformed or they even start eating each other.
That's kind of creepy, but also super fascinating. Like something out of a horror movie, but with plants.
I know, right? And these are just a few examples of how plants have evolved to defend themselves over millions of years.
Yeah.
They're constantly in this battle with insects, coming up with new and clever strategies.
This is seriously mind-blowing. I have so much more respect for plants now.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn about how plants behave. As research continues, I'm sure we'll find even more incredible things.
I can't wait to hear more. What else can we look forward to in part 2?
We're going to dive even deeper into that plant intelligence debate. We'll explore the arguments for and against it. And we'll also talk about what all this means for how we treat plants. It's going to be a really thought-provoking discussion, I think.
I'm excited. See you in part 2.
See you then.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of plants. We really got into some incredible examples of how plants behave in part 1. I mean, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about them.
It really does. And this chapter, it really gets into the debate about plant intelligence.
Right, which is fascinating. Where do we even begin with that?
Well, this debate, it's something that scientists are really talking about a lot. And this chapter brings up some key points from both sides. It's important to remember this isn't just science.
Right.
It's also about, like, some really deep questions about what life is and what consciousness means.
So it's not just about if plants have brains or not.
Right.
It's about how we understand intelligence itself.
Exactly. If we only think about intelligence as what humans do,
Yeah.
then we're going to miss out on all the amazing ways that life has figured out how to survive and thrive, you know? I mean, plants have been around for millions of years.
That's true.
Clearly, they're doing something right.
Yeah, they're not going extinct anytime soon.
Yeah.
So where do people who don't believe in plant intelligence stand on all this? What are their main points?
Well, one big argument is that real intelligence, the way we normally think about it,
Okay.
needs a central nervous system,
Right.
you know, like a brain and neurons. And plants, well, they don't have those.
Right.
So they say plants can't possibly think or make decisions in any complex way.
It's like the no brain, no gain kind of thinking.
Yeah, something like that. They also say that a lot of the things plants do that seem intelligent
That-
might actually just be simple chemical reactions
Okay.
or just automatic responses to things in their environment.
Yeah.
Not real intelligence, just like a program running.
I can see that point of view.
Yeah.
But what about the other side? What do the people who believe in plant intelligence say to that?
They argue that focusing only on brains and neurons is way too limited. It's like saying the only way to fly is with wings and feathers, right? But what about bats?
Yeah, good point.
They fly without feathers. They use echolocation instead. Just because something is different from us doesn't mean it's not intelligent.
So we need to think more broadly about what intelligence could be.
Exactly. They point to how plants adapt to all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Light, gravity, temperature changes. They can even communicate with each other using chemicals, like to warn about danger.
We talked about some of that, how they defend themselves.
Right. And some researchers say these things can't just be automatic responses. They say there's evidence that plants can learn, remember things, and make decisions based on what's happening around them.
That does sound a lot like what we call intelligence.
Right. So what are some specific examples of things plants do that are hard to explain as just simple reflexes?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, remember that plant memory we talked about?
Yeah.
There's this plant called the Mimosa pudica,
Oh, yeah.
or sensitive plant.
It's the one that closes its leaves when you touch it.
Exactly. Scientists did these experiments where they kept dropping water on mimosa leaves.
Okay.
And guess what? Eventually, the plant stopped closing up.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
like it learned that the water wasn't dangerous and decided not to bother reacting anymore.
So it's basically getting used to the water and ignoring it, just like we do with annoying things.
Exactly. And it's not just the mimosa. Other plants can remember droughts or insect attacks
Wow.
and use that memory to prepare for future problems. Like a plant that survived a drought might grow deeper roots next time.
To get to the water, right.
Yep. It's pretty incredible, right?
It is. It's like they're building up resilience from their experiences.
Exactly. And all this learning and adapting, it suggests that plants are doing some pretty complex thinking.
Way more than we give them credit for.
Right. Another example is that kin recognition we talked about.
Where plants recognize their relatives.
Yeah. And this has big implications for how we see plants. It suggests that they're not just responding to their surroundings, they're actually interacting with each other, almost like a society.
So it's not just about every plant for itself.
It seems not. Like, there are studies showing that some plants will actually grow their roots differently when they're near their siblings.
Really?
Yeah, they don't want to compete with their family for resources.
Yeah.
And they're more likely to share nutrients with their siblings.
That's amazing. It's like they understand that family is important.
Right. And this idea of cooperation, it really challenges the old way of thinking about plants as just individuals struggling to survive.
It does. It shows there might be this whole social element to the plant world.
Exactly. It's mind-blowing, right?
It is. This whole idea of plant intelligence, it's really making me rethink what life itself means.
I know, it's fascinating. It forces us to question everything. What does it mean to be intelligent, to be conscious, to be alive? It really changes how we see the world.
So where does this leave us? Do scientists think they'll ever figure out this whole plant intelligence thing for sure?
Well, it's a debate that will probably keep going for a long time. It's complicated. There's no easy answer. But the important thing is that we're having the conversation. You know, scientists are asking new questions, doing new research, really pushing the boundaries of what we know.
So even if we don't come to a definite conclusion about whether plants are intelligent, just the act of trying to figure it out is making us smarter.
Exactly. And I think the more we learn about plants, the more we're going to be amazed by how sophisticated they are.
I'm ready to be amazed. This chapter also brings up some interesting questions about how we treat plants. Ethically?
It does, yeah. Like, if plants are more than just passive things, does that change how we should act towards them?
Right. Like if plants can feel pain or at least experience stress, should we change how we farm?
That's a big question that people are thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
Do we need to change how we grow, harvest, and use plants?
And what about pesticides? If we're starting to realize how complex plants are, shouldn't we be careful about the chemicals we use around them?
It's complicated. We need to balance feeding everyone with protecting the environment.
For sure. It seems like the more we learn about plants, the more ethical questions come up.
That's true. And it's something we need to talk about as a society, you know? How do we want to live with plants in a way that's sustainable and respects them?
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I'm feeling overwhelmed, but also kind of inspired.
That's the thing about science. It challenges us, but it's also really rewarding. The more we learn about plants, the more we realize how connected everything is.
So where do we go from here in our deep dive?
Well, we've talked about the science and the ethics, but there's also the human side to this story.
Okay.
In part 3, we're going to hear about the author's personal experience of rediscovering their love for plants and how that changed how they see the world.
That sounds really interesting. I want to hear how that connects to everything else we've been talking about.
Stay tuned. In part 3, we'll wrap up our deep dive with a mix of science, philosophy, and personal experience. It'll make you think about nature and our place in a whole new way.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the plant world, uncovering all these incredible things they can do. Now, I'm really curious to hear about this personal side to this story that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting. The chapter actually talks about the author's own experience, like how they rediscovered their fascination with plants.
Okay, so tell me about the author. What got them interested in plants in the first place?
Well, they talk about their childhood, spending a lot of time exploring the woods, just being fascinated by nature, like looking at the shapes of leaves and the colors of flowers.
I think we all kind of start out that way, right? Like kids are naturally drawn to nature.
Exactly. But then, life happens. We get busy, we have jobs,
Oh,
responsibilities.
like grown-up stuff.
Yeah. And for the author, that connection with nature kind of faded away. They got caught up in their career, spent most of their time indoors.
I can relate to that. It's easy to lose touch with that sense of wonder we had as kids.
It is. And that's exactly what happened to the author, until one day they had this chance encounter with a fern.
A fern? Really? What kind of fern could have that much of an impact?
Well, it was the Azolla fern, the one we talked about before that's so good at absorbing CO2.
No way. So the same plant that scientists are looking at to help with climate change, that's the one that got this author back into plants.
That's wild. It is. They saw this little patch of Azolla growing in a pond, and something about it just really struck them. They started reading everything they could find about it, doing research, even started collecting ferns.
Sounds like they really dove in head first.
Mm.
It's amazing how one little plant can spark such a big change.
It's true. And in a way, the author's journey is kind of like the journey that science itself is on, right? Like challenging what we thought we knew, being open to new ideas.
Yeah, and realizing there's so much more out there to discover.
Exactly. So how do you think this newfound passion for plants changed the way the author saw the world?
Well, I imagine it made them appreciate plants a lot more. Like, not just seeing them as decorations, but as living beings.
That's exactly what they described. They started to see the complexity, the resilience, the way plants adapt. It filled them with this sense of awe and wonder like they hadn't felt since they were a kid.
It's like they were seeing plants with fresh eyes.
Right. And it wasn't just about plants, it was about everything. They started to understand how connected everything is in nature, how important it is to protect the environment.
It's like they found their place in the world again, through plants.
That's a great way to put it. And it wasn't just an intellectual thing either. The author talks about feeling this deep sense of peace and connection when they're surrounded by plants.
Like a feeling of belonging.
Yeah, exactly. Like tapping into something really primal, something deep within us. I mean, think about it. Humans evolved alongside nature.
Right. We weren't always stuck in offices and cities.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people feel that pull, that longing to get back to nature.
I know I do. So, what can we, the listeners, learn from all this? How can we apply this to our own lives?
Well, I think the author's story shows us that it's never too late to reconnect with nature.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be gardening, going for hikes, even just paying attention to the trees on your street.
Just taking the time to notice, to appreciate.
Exactly. And even if we don't all become botanists, learning about plants can change how we see the world.
I definitely agree with that. This whole deep dive has been eye-opening for me.
I'm glad to hear it. And remember, this is just one chapter, one story. There's so much more to learn about plants, so many mysteries waiting to be solved.
It's amazing to think about all the things we might discover in the future.
It is. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of wonder. You never know what you might find.
Well said. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredible journey into the plant world. I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been my pleasure. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring.